"You're nothing but a bum. You should just get divorced and leave this place." My mother-in-law spat at me, completely disregarding the fact that I had been shouldering my husband's massive debts, paying tens of thousands of dollars each month. My late father-in-law had always treated me kindly, and out of respect for him, I had silently continued to pay off those debts. "You're always glued to that PC or smartphone. Get a real job," she continued, her words dripping with disdain. Calling her a bum is being generous. "This woman hoards all our money," she accused, her animosity cutting deep. "My husband is foolish to disrespect me, the main breadwinner of this house. His betrayal, sanctioned by my late father-in-law, who entrusted me with his company, is unforgivable." "Fine, I'll leave," I declared abruptly, deciding to divorce and collect my things. I left my oblivious mother-in-law and husband to grapple with their debts, moving away with no intention to look back. As I packed, I knew their future held. "My name is Emily. I got married 9 years ago at 33, and we still don't have any children. I run a small printing company inherited from my late husband David and my father-in-law. 3 years ago, my father-in-law passed away, and before that, we lived with David's parents, assisting in their business. Originally, David had been groomed to take over the family business after university, and we rented a place nearby. When my father-in-law wanted David to succeed him due to old age, we moved in to support him. I quit my web design job to manage the printing company's operations. Currently, it's just David and me handling everything since we let go of the one employee my father-in-law had hired. Things were manageable when he was alive, but after his death, the family dynamics changed drastically. My mother-in-law constantly picks fights, blaming me for wandering around the house all day. She fails to see that I manage customer relations and data correction, which has significantly boosted sales. David struggles with computers, and they don't realize I'm the backbone of our operations. Their accusations have only intensified, especially since the arrival of Anna, a former employee and David's childhood friend. They were childhood friends, always in the same class from elementary to high school. After my father-in-law's funeral, Anna began frequenting our printing company. Having known Anna since childhood, she had a good rapport with my mother-in-law. I later learned that Anna was hired because my mother-in-law strongly recommended her to my father-in-law. While he was alive, he often criticized Anna for slacking off and producing careless, error-filled work. During the handover period, I witnessed firsthand how inept she was, struggling even with basic computer tasks, let alone accurate data entry. Critical documents like invoices had to be handwritten by my father-in-law before I could review them. Investigating her online activity, I found she spent most of her time on vulgar and dating websites. It was clear to me, and evidently to my father-in-law, that she wasn't suited for the job. Anna became my mother-in-law's confidant, but her lack of work ethic didn't impress my father-in-law, who valued hard work deeply. The real issue lies with David's change in attitude. While he used to work diligently alongside his father, he now echoes my mother-in-law's complaints. "You have it easy, just playing on the computer all day. It feels like I'm the only one taking this seriously," he accused me, influenced by both my mother-in-law and Anna. When my father-in-law was alive, such accusations never surfaced. Now, it's just the three of us, my mother-in-law, David, and I, living together. All I want is to preserve the printing company my father-in-law entrusted to us. Yet it's proving difficult and headaches abound. Our orders have increased thanks to my precise data corrections, boosting sales. However, our financial woes persist due to my mother-in-law's and David's reckless spending habits. My mother-in-law splurges on luxury goods without restraint, ignoring warnings. Since David took over as CEO after his father's death, he too spends lavishly despite our small operation. Customers mistakenly see him as the second-generation CEO, fueling his misconceptions. After work, he frequently indulges in drinking, and my mother-in-law joins him for dinners out, further straining our finances. David even took out a substantial bank loan for a new venture without consulting me, burdening us with monthly repayments we can't afford. When I pressed him for details, he evaded my questions, possibly to fund his lavish lifestyle. Inheriting the CEO title and company seems to have inflated his desires and misjudgments. As I watch my own family fritter away money while I manage an increasing workload, my mother-in-law mistakenly believes our business thrives with ample income and continues to spend excessively. It's a perilous spiral, worsened by David's undisclosed loan repayments, amounting to several $100,000 monthly. I handle the finances, so I'm the one who has to make ends meet, but their spending never ceases, forcing me to take drastic measures. I explained our dire financial situation and put both my mother-in-law and David on a strict allowance. It seemed like a reasonable step, but they were unconvinced and began acting unbelievably. Your company seems to be doing well. Are you hiding money for yourself? Anna, a former employee, stirred up suspicions. She suggested there might be cash or life insurance left by my late husband, and they took her word over mine. Whether they believed her or simply found her accusations convenient, Anna became a threat and a constant annoyance. My marriage with David has cooled significantly. We once talked about starting a family before and after I turned 30, but that dream now feels distant. While they dine out lavishly, I'm left managing the leftovers and feeling overwhelmed with frustration. Yet two reasons keep me enduring this ordeal. One is my hobby on social media. Posting about my daily struggles at home and work has surprisingly gained popularity, serving as a therapeutic outlet. The other, more significant reason is my promise to my late father-in-law. He entrusted me with this printing company, particularly its critical finances and client relations. His trust in me was profound, often apologizing for his wife and son's behavior, urging me not to tolerate their foolishness. I feel compelled to honor his legacy by safeguarding what he built. Despite their accusations, calling me lazy and money-hungry, I patiently explain our financial reality. What happened to David's savings? There should be something left, my mother-in-law demanded, oblivious to the fact that my father-in-law's savings were depleted long ago, thanks to their extravagant spending. David even took out a bank loan in the company's name without consulting me, further complicating our finances. Their ignorance and accusations against my late father-in-law's integrity disgust me. He was an honest man who never resorted to tax evasion or secret accounts, contrary to their baseless claims. As I pondered whether continuing to endure their money-driven antics was my way of honoring my father-in-law, a shocking scene unfolded one Friday night. A long-standing client urgently needed a sample print for a new product catalog over the weekend. Despite David being out drinking, I took it upon myself to deliver the sample directly to the client. On my way back, I froze at the sight ahead. Walking arm in arm were David and a woman. Beside them, my mother-in-law cozied up to them, oblivious to my presence. I couldn't believe my eyes. As they chatted carefreely, I distanced myself, stunned and betrayed. I recognized her instantly when I saw her profile. It was Anna, our former employee. My thoughts froze as I stood there, watching them chat happily and disappear to a high-end barbecue restaurant in the distance. I remained rooted to the spot in shock. I don't recall how I managed to get home afterward. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in front of my computer, replaying the scene in my mind. Seeing David and Anna together like that, it was clear their relationship wasn't typical. Despite our strained marriage, witnessing such betrayal ignited a deep anger within me. If David and Anna were involved romantically, it would explain everything, especially my mother-in-law's unexpected presence with them. It seemed my mother-in-law and Anna had been friends since long ago, but her nonchalant enjoyment of their closeness today was unsettling. Could it be that David's affair with Anna had her approval? I couldn't fathom such a betrayal, yet it would make sense of their behavior since my father-in-law's passing. I wanted to protect the printing company entrusted to me, but I felt lost. Saturday passed without David or my mother-in-law returning. It wasn't until Sunday afternoon that they finally showed up, claiming they had been at a downtown spa together. Together, you say? Wasn't Anna there too? I calmly questioned, hitting a nerve as their anger erupted. What's wrong with Anna? She's just concerned for Mom and me. David defended, his tone defensive. She knows you're trying to control my father's savings on your own. Their emotional outbursts confirmed my suspicions. They had been colluding with Anna against me. I'm divorcing a woman who hoards my father's savings, David declared sharply. If you're so keen on leaving, then go. Accepting his words, I calmly replied, understood. I will leave, and swiftly departed. My bags were packed the day before, ready to be delivered to my parents' house. I could return later for the rest. Leaving that place was all I wanted. David's final words pierced me as I bit my lip, fists clenched tight. A week later, I returned to complete the divorce proceedings and hand over my late father-in-law's company. David, my mother-in-law, and even Anna were all present. Sign it quickly, David demanded, thrusting the divorce papers at me before I could review them. My mother-in-law interjected sharply, "It's too late for apologies. You should be grateful David and I aren't suing you." Ignoring her jab, I checked the papers David had handed me and silently signed my name. As I looked up, I noticed all three of them smirking. "Give me all the company's books and documents," David ordered, eyeing the drawer of my desk. I retrieved the files and handed them over. David eagerly opened the bank books, flanked by my scrutinizing mother-in-law and Anna. Their smug expressions quickly soured. "What's this?" Anna exclaimed, noting the balance in the bank book. "This can't be right." My mother-in-law peered over David's shoulder, muttering, "Isn't this incorrect?" David turned to me accusingly, thrusting the bank book in my direction. "What does a balance of $30 mean?" I calmly explained, "It represents our total assets. While we generate around $22,000 monthly, our expenses are substantial. The lease fees for our machinery alone exceed $1 million monthly. We also have significant costs for electricity, loans on delivery trucks, and forklifts, not to mention the ongoing repayment of a bank loan taken after my father-in-law's passing, which exceeds $3,000 monthly." Their incredulous expressions didn't waver. "There's no way that's right," my mother-in-law retorted. "We print and deliver every day. How can we have no money?" I continued, "Despite our revenue, personal loans mismanaged by my mother-in-law and David require over $2,000 monthly, which I have been managing alone, including all living expenses." "I've explained this already," I reiterated calmly. "Without the burden of your repayments, I'll have over $2,000 monthly free, which will make things much easier." "Don't lie about us having no money when we work hard every day," David shouted emotionally, refusing to understand. "Yelling won't change the facts," I replied evenly. "Yes, there's revenue, but it's already been eaten up by your loans and your mother's. After repayments, we might save around $5,000. Realizing they wouldn't be able to afford anything during the repayment period was no longer my concern. They would learn the hard way. "When will these repayments end?" Anna asked pragmatically, cutting through the tension. "The bank loan has 3 more years, and David and his mother's personal loans have over 5, I replied bluntly, causing Anna to gasp in shock. "So we'll be in the red for the next 3 years?" Anna sighed disappointedly. "At this rate, most likely," I affirmed coldly, grateful that Anna seemed to be grasping the reality. "What about my husband's hidden account? He had one, right, Anna?" my mother-in-law interjected, trying to placate Anna, who had provided the information. "Yeah, there must be a secret account," Anna pressed on, her focus self-centered. "I've never heard of it or seen it while he was alive," I stated firmly. "Perhaps everyone should search for it after this." I couldn't fathom Anna's insistence on this hidden account, as if she were in some drama. Among the three who were gradually coming to terms with reality, David finally posed a practical question. "Wait, then how have you managed this financial issue so far?" he asked, finally getting to the crux of the matter. "Ah, yes," I began, explaining in detail. "I've been covering our living costs and bridging the gap with my personal income. I have a blog called Small Factory Struggle Diary with over 1 million followers. The substantial advertising revenue it generates is deposited into my personal account each month, requiring separate tax filings from the company's financial statements. I think you'll understand once you review the books later, but the company owes repayment obligations due to the supplementary costs from my personal lending. Please consult with a tax accountant or lawyer," I advised calmly. That's the main point I wanted to convey today. Regardless of the divorce settlement, I will become a creditor in the future. I used to support their lives because they were family, but that's no longer my concern. Of course, I expect to recover the money I lent, I stated firmly. "David, even as a CEO, you're no different from someone in dire financial straits," Anna remarked, grasping the situation quickly. "I can't be with you in this situation. Goodbye," Anna declared, turning to leave swiftly. David and his mother hurriedly followed, trying to convince her otherwise. "It's fine, we can secure additional financing from the bank if needed. Anna, you can trust my husband's company," my ex-mother-in-law reassured, desperately hoping to salvage the situation. Having said all I needed to, I decided it was time to leave. Months later, I heard that David and his mother had approached the bank for additional financing, only to be rejected. They reluctantly rescheduled to reduce monthly payments and extend the repayment period. This outcome didn't surprise me. It was exactly what I had anticipated. Pathetic indeed. A few weeks after our divorce proceedings, David and my ex-mother-in-law visited my parents' home unexpectedly. "Emily, I was foolish. The company can't function without you. Please come back," David pleaded, kneeling at the entrance. "I'm truly sorry, Emily. I've warned him as well. Can't you please help David?" my ex-mother-in-law added, also kneeling beside him. Facing their financial crisis, they seemed desperate, but it was too late. My parents stood firm, refusing to let them inside. The conversation remained at the doorway. "You said everything would be fine with enough sales. Why not seek advice from Anna instead of me?" I coldly dismissed them, watching them leave with their heads down. As they walked away, my parents warned them never to return. It was a surreal moment, but I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Rescheduling loans wouldn't solve their problems. Most of David's clients had terminated their contracts and sought my services instead. Since I had resigned via email from my personal address, they naturally approached me for data modifications. David couldn't manage these clients, being computer illiterate. I secured an exclusive contract with a major printing company for personal design services, ensuring smooth printing arrangements. Rumors circulated that Anna completely ignored David, while my ex-mother-in-law visibly struggled, having lost weight and her ability to eat properly. They faced complaints and penalties from remaining clients. Their downfall was swift and self-inflicted. Adjusting to my new life, I decided to visit my father-in-law's grave. Standing there, I remembered his words. "Emily, I entrust my printing company to you. If you can't tolerate my foolish wife and son, feel free to sever ties with them. They're not bad people, but they are easily swayed by money." Perhaps he foresaw this outcome. I apologized sincerely for failing to protect his company, sharing updates from my lawyer. "Father-in-law, your company is heading towards bankruptcy under David's management. My lawyer suggests I buy it. What should I do?" Buying the company would cost tens of millions, but now it seemed a small price to pay. Offering it as a subsidiary to the major printing company I had an exclusive contract with seemed viable. If David changed his ways, perhaps I could consider hiring him as an employee. But I knew my father-in-law in heaven would shake his head and say something like, "Emily, you don't need to force yourself." Sarah passed away. I received a call while I was taking care of my daughter, Sarah's child. According to the police, Sarah and her husband Spencer were hit by a car while crossing an intersection, and soon after, they passed away. The sudden news left me in shock. My heart raced and I felt dizzy. Sarah had been laughing with us just a few hours ago. I rushed to confirm the news, and from that point on, there was no time to grieve as I was overwhelmed with various procedures. During this time, a discussion about the future of Sarah's triplets with Spencer's parents, Susan and Isaac, came up. When I asked Susan and Isaac about what would happen to Sarah and Spencer's children, Susan said something unbelievable. "What should we do with the kids? They hassle. Maybe put them in a facility." I wondered if my ears were deceiving me. The feeling of disbelief filled my heart. During Sarah's life, the triplets had lived with their grandparents on their father's side. Despite us not seeing them as often, our emotional attachment to the grandchildren should have been much deeper. "Aren't you worried about the future of your adorable grandchildren?" I asked. "They should have adored them so much." "It's all right. My husband and I will take care of Sarah and Spencer's children with all our love." Nearly 20 years have passed since then. Though we faced many challenges, I am proud that all three have grown into fine adults. I never forgot the sadness of losing Sarah and Spencer, but I always thought of living happily for their sake too. Then one day, the doorbell rang suddenly. When I opened the door, there stood Susan and Isaac, whom I hadn't seen in years. Susan and Isaac ignored my surprise, entered, and faced the triplets. Then they said something unbelievable. "Would you like to live with us again?" "My name is Kennedy. My husband Harold was my high school classmate. We started dating then and got married after becoming working adults. At the age of 27, we were blessed with a child. Her name was Sarah. As our only daughter, we devoted all our love to her. Sarah grew up to be a bright and energetic child. When Sarah became a college student, she introduced us to her boyfriend, Spencer, who was a year older than her. One day, she approached us with a request. "Mom, I'd like you to keep the end of this month, Sunday, free. Dad too. We have something we want to discuss. It's about Spencer and me." The end of this month? Sure. Harold has the day off, so that's fine. But what's it about? I'll explain everything then. Sorry, but please make sure you're free that day, and tell Dad not to go fishing. I was curious about what was going on, but Sarah wouldn't say more until the day. Lost in a whirlwind of thoughts, I awaited the day. When it finally arrived, Sarah mentioned that the discussion would be at Spencer's family home, which I somewhat expected. Such occasions where both families come together to talk are rare after all. Never having met Spencer's parents before, my nerves were barely concealed as we made our way to their house. Nice to meet you. I'm Spencer's mother. Please come in. Nice to meet you. We appreciate your hospitality. We were greeted by Spencer's mother, Susan. My nervousness only grew with Susan's monotone voice, as it did seem very welcoming upon entering their house. It was clear from the start that something was off. Spencer's father, Isaac, and Spencer were already seated, and an uneasy atmosphere hung in the air. We sat down in front of Spencer's family, ready to listen. Slowly, Spencer began to speak. Sarah and I are expecting a child. We apologize for the sudden news, but please allow us to marry and have this child. Despite his nervousness, Spencer made sure to look us in the eyes as he spoke. They were not yet married, and both were still students. You could tell he expected opposition. His voice trembled slightly. After Spencer finished, silence ensued. Gathering my courage, I voiced my concerns about them proceeding with the pregnancy. Do you understand what it means to have a child? What about school? How do you plan to support yourselves? You've never worked before. It's more challenging than you think. Following that, Spencer's parents, Susan and Isaac, also opposed the idea, deeming them too young. Don't be ridiculous. You're still children yourselves, talking about marriage and a baby. Who do you think has been paying for your education, you ingrates? Their words were a torrent of anger. However, Sarah and Spencer's determination was much stronger than expected, unwavering in their decision to have the baby. After much discussion, Sarah and Spencer pleaded with us again. Please, we've talked about this over and over, promising to overcome any hardship together. Please. Hearing Sarah's almost disappearing voice stirred something in me. Sarah had always been such a good child, never once demanding, and now, for the first time, she was conveying her wishes to us with all her might. Although I initially opposed, as we talked more, I began to understand the depth of their commitment. I could see their resolve was genuine. Still somewhat anxious, I decided to support their decision to marry and have the baby if that was what Sarah wanted. Sarah seemed relieved by my support, but Spencer's parents remained steadfastly opposed. If you absolutely cannot accept it, then Spencer and I will cut ties. That way, we won't be a burden, right? Sensing the conversation was going nowhere, Spencer quietly made his stance clear. Spencer, isn't that a bit too drastic? Let's take this over calmly. I gently urged Spencer to reconsider. I know it sounds drastic, but if this is the only way, Spencer insisted. Startled by the mention of cutting ties, Susan and Isaac hesitated. They requested a brief consultation and moved to a different location. I caught glimpses of them whispering and casting glances our way from the corner of my eye. After a short while, Susan and Isaac returned, sharing a smug smile before presenting their decision. They would allow the marriage and pregnancy, but with conditions. The initial relief of their acceptance was quickly overshadowed by the word conditions, making everyone but Susan and Isaac tense. The stipulation was that Sarah and Spencer must live with Spencer's parents at their home. Additionally, we, Sarah's parents, were to provide Susan and Isaac with living expenses for Sarah. The thought of Sarah, who had never lived on her own, much less with her in-laws, filled me with apprehension. What's the matter? Any complaints? If you can't accept these terms, then we won't approve of the pregnancy or the marriage. And of course, we'll categorically refuse to cut ties with Spencer. What will it be, Sarah? Susan's confrontational tone caused Sarah to look down. Okay, thank you for your approval, Sarah reluctantly agreed after some thought. The anxious look on Sarah's face made me feel a twinge of sadness. Though my worries never fully dissipated, seeing Spencer gently support Sarah, I decided to keep a watchful eye on them for a while. Soon, Sarah and Spencer proceeded to drop out of college to support their upcoming child. Spencer started working at a company owned by a friend of Harold, while Sarah assisted with piecework and household chores under Susan, her future mother-in-law. Harold, who had introduced Spencer to the job despite having no work experience, did his best to help them adjust to their new responsibilities. Initially, I inquired about his progress out of concern. Contrary to Harold's worries, Spencer was well regarded at his workplace. Spencer seems to be doing really well at work. I'm quite proud. Harold spoke with pride, showing how diligently Spencer worked and saved money. Our initial anxiety gradually transformed into a growing sense of reassurance about Sarah and Spencer. Time passed, and Sarah safely gave birth to triplets. When I first heard it was triplets, I was so surprised that I kept asking Sarah if there was a mistake, a memory that still stands vividly in my mind. I don't know anyone in my circle who has had triplets, and I've heard that multiple pregnancies carry higher risks compared to singleton pregnancies. Amidst these concerns, the days were filled with worry about whether they would be born safely, but the triplets were developing well in Sarah's womb. When they were born, they were incredibly adorable, truly becoming the apple of my eye. Nancy was the first to arrive, the only girl among them. Her eyes were big and beautifully double-lidded, a very charming little girl right from the start. Then came Tanner, the smallest at birth, making us hope he would grow strong and healthy. Lastly was Taylor, who consumed the most milk, making Sarah feel he was robust. Sarah and Spencer cherished their children deeply, and we as grandparents frequently visited Isaac's house to dote on them. After giving birth to the triplets, Sarah started working a part-time job. The following year, Spencer, wanting to provide more for his adorable children, and Sarah changed jobs to earn more, working harder than before. Seeing Sarah's family come together joyfully reminded me of Sarah's childhood. I deeply wished for their happiness to last forever. One day, Sarah's family planned to visit our home. Harold was looking forward to playing with our grandchildren. From the morning, I was excited too, with the table laden with their favorite snacks and toys. Soon, the doorbell rang, and there stood Sarah, Spencer, and the triplets.
Hello, Grandma and Grandpa. Tanner, who was small at birth, had grown into a lively boy. Taylor ran after Tanner into the living room. Nancy, being the only girl, seemed a bit shy compared to her brothers. Seeing Nancy, Harold crouched to her level, offering his hand. Hello, Nancy. There are some sweets over there. Shall we go together? Comforted by Harold's gentle voice, Nancy took his hand and walked towards the living room. Spencer followed them, and Sarah and I walked behind. Unexpectedly, Sarah stopped. I turned around, wondering why she had paused. Mom, there's something I want to talk about, just the two of you. Seeing her unusually serious face, I felt a slight unease. Okay, shall we talk in your room then? We went to the room Sarah used before moving out. Sarah sat on the bed, and I took a seat on a chair. Then, looking determined, Sarah started to speak. Once the kids turned 5, I'm thinking of moving out from my in-laws' house. What's wrong? Did something happen? I had never heard any complaints or grievances from Sarah, who had lived with her in-laws until now. Sarah began to speak quietly, and after confiding in me, left to join her children. Later, Sarah and Spencer asked us to watch the kids for a few hours as they wanted to look for a new place to live after moving out of the in-laws' house. Of course, take some time for yourselves, I encouraged with a smile and a hand on their children's heads. Sarah and Spencer left the house. It had been quite some time since Sarah's family arrived, so Nancy, who was initially nervous, was now engrossed in the toys we had prepared. Tanner and Taylor were playing together with block toys. I was all set to keep them entertained until Sarah and Spencer returned. How many hours had passed since they left? I was starting to worry when I glanced at the clock, and just then the phone rang. A bad feeling washed over me as I rushed to answer it. It was the police on the line. Yes, that's me. Yes, okay, understood. The police officer's voice seemed so distant as I hung up the phone in shock. Harold, sensing something was wrong, came over and shook my shoulder. What's wrong? You look pale. My voice trembled as I explained that Sarah and Spencer had been in an accident. They were hit by a car while crossing an intersection and had died instantly. How could I possibly explain this to their innocent children, still playing joyfully? The mere thought brought tears to my eyes. Harold and I hurried to the hospital to start the necessary procedures and confirmations. Harold's hand on my shoulder was trembling, making the reality all the more poignant. After confirming Sarah and Spencer's death, we were swamped with arrangements without even a moment to grieve. There were endless visits to the police and municipal offices, funeral arrangements, and notifying relatives. At Sarah and Spencer's funeral, friends and Spencer's colleagues mourned their untimely deaths, highlighting how beloved they were. It struck me how fortunate they were to have such a supportive community. While Harold and I were busy with funeral staff and attendees, Susan and Isaac were surrounded by acquaintances shedding endless tears. Despite our own sadness, we were just trying to stay strong amidst the overwhelming pain. I muttered to myself, heartbroken during the hectic funeral. Susan's promise to raise the triplets well was the only thing that offered me a sliver of comfort, showing her caring heart for them. Even after the funeral ended, the busy days continued without a break, especially with taking care of the grandchildren. Since the day Sarah and Spencer had their accident, the triplets have been living with us. We didn't tell them directly about their parents' passing, just that they wouldn't be seeing them anymore. Even though they're young, they must find it strange not to see their parents return after a whole day. Understanding they won't see their beloved parents again, tears welled up in my eyes. The eldest, Tanner and Taylor, perhaps not fully grasping the situation, looked at crying Nancy with curiosity and gently patted her head. "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Shall I bring you some medicine?" The boys, especially being protective of Nancy, the only girl, asked her gently. They must feel it's their duty to protect her, even unconsciously. Embracing these kind-hearted three, I too shed tears. Harold and I had never spent a night with these children before. Perhaps out of consideration for their in-laws, Sarah and her family had never stayed over at our house. We were completely unfamiliar with their meal schedules, nap times, or how to put them to bed. Everything was uncharted territory, leaving Harold and me feeling overwhelmed. Tanner and Taylor probably started to sense something was wrong, realizing they couldn't see their beloved parents. They became anxious and started crying. I wanted to stay close to Nancy, who hadn't smiled since the accident, but there were too many urgent tasks to handle. I tried calling Susan and Isaac, hoping they could share some of the burden. Hello. I was hoping to ask for your help with some arrangements." Susan's response over the phone was cold. We're not really knowledgeable about that. You probably handle it more smoothly, right? We had never spent a night with these children before, to be honest. We weren't experts either. We were just trying our best because it needed to be done. However, no matter how much we repeated it, they couldn't help with the various tasks. Could you at least stay with the children until we finish the procedures? They must be missing you, I asked. No, we're quite busy ourselves. Honestly, we don't have the capacity, was their response. But please, I'm sorry, we have to go now. And with that, the call was abruptly ended. Further attempts to ask for their help over the phone were unsuccessful. No good response ever came. Struggling with the grief of losing Sarah and Spencer, Harold and I managed all the arrangements and took care of the grandchildren, truly exhausted. What remained was the discussion about the division of the estate and custody. Susan and Isaac had not shown their faces since they left their belongings at our house. Up until the day of the discussions, I remembered how much they adored their first grandchildren. Now, understating their parents were gone, the once lively boys had become withdrawn. Harold and I couldn't escape our sorrow, continuing to live in a heavy atmosphere, exhausted from all the arrangements. I hoped the discussions would proceed smoothly. On the day of the discussion, Susan and Isaac arrived at our house and were led to the living room. "Just going to talk for a bit. Can you play here?" I said to Tanner, the eldest, who obediently took Taylor and Nancy to another room. When I first brought up the future of the children, Susan immediately started discussing the estate. Susan argued that since they had taken care of Sarah's family, all the assets should go to them. Holding back my urge to confront her priority over assets rather than the children, I tried to steer the conversation back to the kids. Then, Susan said something unbelievable. "The kids are too much trouble. How about putting them in a facility?" I doubted my ears. Sarah's children, whom we've lovingly raised, are her precious treasures. Just like Sarah, we hold the belief that these adorable grandchildren are invaluable to us. But it seems Susan and Isaac stood on different ground. Without any sign of remorse, they made shocking statements, escalating my distrust. They pushed all the troubles onto us while demanding the estate simply because they had lived together in the past. Remembering what Sarah confided in me, I clenched my fists in anger. Then I slowly began to speak. "Sarah's children will be taken care of by us. We'll discuss the estate later," I said firmly. Despite my tone, Susan and Isaac kept insisting on transferring the estate rights to them, expecting to gain control. Today, their disregard for their grandchildren, who they once adored, turned my anger into dismay and sadness. What was the meaning of their promise at the funeral to raise the triplets well? Their current behavior made it clear that those words were just for show. I wanted to confront them but refrained, weighed down by the grief of losing Sarah and Spencer and the exhaustion from all the procedures. Of course, taking in our grandchildren was not an issue for us. It might take some time to adjust, but we were confident in our love and care for them. As Susan and Isaac continued to talk about the estate, I quietly resolved in my heart. Impatient with the unproductive discussion, they eventually left our house, adamant about not handing over the estate. Years have passed since Sarah and Spencer died, almost 2 decades. I still remember the joy of legally adopting the triplets. Had these precious children remained with Susan and Isaac, I shudder to think how they might have been treated. The thought alone fills me with dread.
We subtly informed the triplets about becoming estranged from Susan and Isaac. The fact that they were never taken in or visited by them is something I fear would hurt them, and I've still not managed to express it directly. Throughout my explanation, none of them looked particularly sad, simply acknowledging with a "we understand." Without their parents, they might have felt lonely during school activities or when interacting with mom friends. Struggling with things they couldn't do well, yet all 3 have grown up to be such honest and wonderful children, not letting those challenges affect them. Now, they truly feel like my own children, carrying on Sarah and Spencer's legacy. We were living peaceful days with the triplets when one day, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I was surprised to find Susan and Isaac standing there. "Hello, it's been a while," Isaac greeted as if the years hadn't affected him. "Oh, it's been a long time. What brings you here all of a sudden?" Ignoring my bewildered reaction, Susan and Isaac entered our house as if it was a matter of course. I hurried after them, taking a good look at their backs for the first time in years. Since then, Susan and Isaac had contacted us a few times about the estate, but they had never once come to see the grandchildren. I had pleaded with them to visit the grieving children, even if just briefly, but busy schedules and other excuses always got in the way, and they never accepted. Our communication dwindled over time, and seeing each other now was truly rare. It seems we've both aged quite a bit, perhaps feeling mutual about this. Susan, leaning on a cane, stood with Isaac's support. I ushered them into the guest room and then briefly explained the situation to Taylor, who was in the living room. "I've got another set of grandparents visiting. Could you fetch Nancy and Tanner for greetings?" "Are they the ones you mentioned were estranged from?" "Yes, that's them." "I wonder what they want." Muttering in confusion, Taylor went off to fetch Nancy and Tanner from his room. Shortly after, led by Taylor, Nancy and Tanner joined us in the guest room. Upon seeing the grown triplets, Susan and Isaac immediately showed a gentle smile, grasping Tanner's hand warmly. "You've grown so much." As Susan fondly stroked Tanner's hand, I was stunned, but Susan, undeterred by my reaction, made an unbelievable proposal. "Why don't we live together again, like old times?" This unexpected suggestion left everyone but Susan and Isaac wide-eyed. Why now, after all this time? If they wanted to live together, why did they push the triplets away back then? They weren't there when the kids truly needed someone. They hadn't shown their faces for so long. Overwhelmed with too many unspoken thoughts, I couldn't decide what to say first. Without a word from me or the triplets, Susan pressed on. "You know, my legs have been quite bad lately. Isaac's been supporting me, but we never know what might happen to us, right? It would be reassuring to have you by our side." At first, I thought they wanted to reconnect now that the grandchildren were grown and less of a burden, but it seemed not to be the case. Were they planning to use these children for their own care after abandoning them so heartlessly before? After abandoning their precious grandchildren like that, how dare they speak so opportunistically now? I was beyond exasperated by their unchanged demeanor, speechless but determined not to let these children be exploited yet. Before I could voice my objection, it was Tanner who spoke up. "Who are you? Can you leave if you're going to be a bother?" Tanner, looking annoyed, shook off Susan's grasp. In agreement with Tanner, Nancy and Taylor also looked sternly at Susan and Isaac. Surprised by the unexpected resistance, Susan and Isaac showed their anger. Then Susan pointed at me, accusing, "She's the one who tore you away from us. We wanted to live together, but it wasn't possible because of her." The grandchildren, noticing the lack of sincerity in Susan and Isaac's words, continued to cast cold glances at them. Over time, they had grown significantly, now looking down on Susan and Isaac. Simply by standing, Tanner and Taylor stood protectively in front of Nancy and me. Susan and Isaac, disliking the show of defiance from Tanner and Taylor, clenched their jaws tightly. Then they exclaimed,
They used to be such obedient and good kids before. You've been brainwashed by this too." At that moment, my patience ran out. Suppressing the urge to shout back in anger, I retrieved something from the drawer and presented it to Susan. Sarah confided in me before her passing. This was given to me at that time. Recalling Sarah's pained expression that day, my voice deepened.
"It's all written here, how harshly you treated Sarah just before her accident." Sarah had handed me a small diary. It contained dates and entries resembling a journal. Initially, I had only skimmed through its pages. After Sarah and Spencer's death, as life gradually became more manageable, I remembered the diary and read it carefully, page by page. The entries detailed how Susan exploited Sarah's guilt over their shotgun marriage and her student status, treating her poorly. Sarah endured in silence, unable to share her struggles with anyone. As her pregnancy progressed and her appetite increased, Susan complained about the rising food expenses and reduced Sarah's portions behind Sarah and Spencer's backs. Money was taken from their wallets and accounts. The diary detailed various abuses Sarah had suffered at the hands of Susan and Isaac. Some pages were smudged with what seemed like tears, illustrating the depth of Sarah's pain. Every day, Susan and Isaac hesitantly took the diary, read the first page, then immediately closed it, choosing not to read further. Their reaction confirmed the truth of the contents written within. Although I hesitated to speak of the painful circumstances in front of the triplets, the thought of them possibly being exploited by Susan and Isaac compelled me to share the testimony Sarah had entrusted to me. Sarah had confided in me painfully about her struggles, how her heart eroded with each act of forbearance, and her frustration at not being able to get along with Susan. Remembering Sarah's plight, I felt my grip tighten. How much Sarah suffered, those words I had directed at myself, wondering why I hadn't noticed Sarah's struggles until she confided in me. Despite seeing the diary, Susan claimed not to remember any such thing, showing no signs of apology or remorse. Faced with Susan and Isaac's persistent requests to live together again, I sighed deeply, holding back tears of anger at Susan and Isaac, and at myself for not recognizing Sarah's pain. Nancy gently patted my back. The triplets, even at their young age, faintly remembered Susan being harsh towards Sarah. Nancy, especially being a mama's girl, was always by Sarah's side at home. She distinctly remembered Susan's stern behavior towards Sarah, particularly when Spencer wasn't around. The one clear memory she had was that Sarah often looked sad after talking with Susan. Nancy shared her frustration about being unable to do anything as a child living with Susan and Isaac. I was taken aback, as they had never spoken of these things until now, perhaps sparing Harold and me any worry. At the same time, I felt a surge of anger, knowing that Susan was harsh towards Sarah even in front of her young children. Nancy stood beside Tanner and Taylor, all with determined looks, stating, "We don't want to live with such people," echoing Tanner's sentiments. Taylor and Nancy showed agreement. Following Tanner, I spoke up, "I cannot hand over these precious children to you." I stated my position clearly, yet despite our insistence, Susan and Isaac kept pushing to live together with the triplets. Their desperation was evident, likely because their situation wasn't going as planned. Their physical strength seemed to be waning, probably affecting their daily lives. I could empathize with Susan and Isaac's feelings to some extent, as I too have felt the effects of aging, and I knew how significant the support of these children can be during tough times. But the idea of exploiting my precious children for convenience was intolerable. The triplets had been calm during our discussions, but eventually, they showed their anger. "When our parents died, you wanted to send us away to an institution because we were too much trouble." They vaguely remembered. That they remembered such a thing pained my heart. Despite their denials, Taylor countered with a reminder of their own words. "I'll return those exact words to you now. Please leave if you can't handle it. Perhaps you should go to an institution." Following Taylor, Tanner repeated those words. Nancy, showing a strong resolve, also stared down Susan and Isaac. These children, once dismissed as a nuisance 17 years ago, were now returning those words to Susan and Isaac as accomplished adults. Their words made me feel the significance of how Harold and I had raised the triplets together. While I felt a sense of clarity, Susan and Isaac's frustration only deepened. It was thought that Tanner and Taylor's words would finally make them give up. But against expectations, Susan and Isaac only showed irritation without any signs of remorse. "Spencer was supposed to take care of us. Now that he's gone, it's only natural you should do it right." "Yeah. And if you can't do that, then give us a monthly allowance. Have you forgotten all the care we provided when you were little? Far from showing any regret, they made even more unreasonable demands. They even demanded payment for the care they had supposedly provided up to that point. I was truly at a loss for words. The lack of compassion from Susan and Isaac was shocking beyond anything I had anticipated. Frozen in shock, the triplets exchanged looks inside. Tanner, who had become a police officer, was the first to speak. If you make any more trouble, I'll call the police. As an officer, I can assure a prompt response. Tanner, now a police officer, warned sternly. Nancy, now a lawyer, spoke next, asserting, if you threaten our beloved family like this again, we will take legal action. Susan and Isaac's faces paled by the second. Taylor, who worked at the city hall, delivered the final blow. Also, you're behind on your property taxes, aren't you? Seizure proceedings are likely to start soon. Perhaps you have other matters to attend to. Hearing those words, Susan and Isaac exchanged looks, seemingly realizing they had hit a nerve. They left our home with their heads bowed, their earlier momentum gone. I watched the backs of these three who have become so dependable despite the hardships and the absence of their parents. They'd grown into such caring and wonderful adults, moved to tears by their growth. The triplets comforted me with a gentle hand. After that day, Susan and Isaac never stormed our house again, though they continued to cause trouble at their workplaces, leading to repeated police reports. I had thought they had given up after such a heated discussion. Their persistence left me wondering what to do. Time passed, and then Tanner brought news. Susan and Isaac had been arrested. Isaac reportedly attacked a police officer at Tanner's police station when they were about to be reported again. This constituted a serious obstruction of justice, including their past nuisances. Both were arrested. Relieved by this news, I once again thanked the triplets. Thank you for growing up so admirably. No matter how many times I say it, it never feels enough. It's us who should be thanking you. We're really grateful. Thank you for being there during the hard times. We've grown this much because of you too. They expressed their gratitude to me and Harold. Seeing Sarah's gentle image overlaid on the triplets, I felt profoundly moved. Even months after Susan and Isaac's arrest, the triplets continued to live happily with us, each now with someone special. As they reach the age of considering marriage, the question of who will stay with Harold and me has become a playful contention, ensuring our family enjoys peaceful and harmonious days. Growing up, my twin sister Anna and I were very different. She was like the perfect daughter while I wasn't. Our dad was a serious professor, always focused on his work, and our mom was all about being a traditional housewife. They wanted us to be just like them, but I was more into band t-shirts and keeping to myself. Mom always compared me to Anna, who seemed to do everything right. She'd ask why I couldn't be more like her, especially when I showed up at breakfast with my headphones on. Anna, on the other hand, basked in Mom's praise. She'd wonder why it was so hard for me to dress nicely and smile. It felt like we were from different worlds. One Saturday, we had to attend one of Dad's boring faculty parties, which we couldn't skip. I decided to rebel in my own little way. I put on some heavy eyeliner and wore boots that definitely didn't fit the usual standards. "You're not going out like that, are you?" Mom caught me on the stairs, eyeing my boots like they were covered in mud. I shrugged, my usual defense. "Don't see why not," she sighed, that long sigh that meant I was the biggest disappointment in her perfectly ordered world. "Please, Eliza, just this once, can't you try to fit in? For once, pretend we're the perfect family." I shot back, tired of the same old argument. "It's not about pretending, it's about showing respect for your father," she argued, her voice getting sharper. Anna overheard and chimed in, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Mom's right, Liz, it's not that hard to look decent. Why do you always have to make things difficult?" "Maybe I don't want to be a clone of you, Anna," I snapped, feeling my face heat up. I hated these arguments, hated being compared, but more than anything, I hated feeling like the odd one out in my own home. Dad appeared at the bottom of the stairs, looking serious. "Eliza, go change now. We're leaving in 10 minutes, he said firmly. His tone didn't allow for any argument. He didn't need to raise his voice. The disappointment in his eyes was enough to make me obey. I marched back to my room to swap my boots for boring flats and wipe away half my eyeliner. As we drove to the party, the car was silent except for the classical music Dad insisted on playing because it was calming. I stared out the window, watching the trees blur past. In that moment,
I promised myself someday I'd live a life where no one could tell me what to wear, how to act, or who to be. Someday, I'd be free from an echo of these expectations. My room was the only place where I could pretend I was somewhere else, anywhere else. Unlike the rest of the house, filled with my parents' choices, my room was mine. It wasn't much, just 4 walls covered in sketches and music posters, but it was my escape from the reality of my family's expectations. One evening, as I was trying to lose myself in a playlist of my favorite bands, Dad knocked and marched into my room. His face was set in a familiar frown. "Eliza, turn that noise down, and why haven't you studied with Anna today? You know you both have exams coming up," he said, his voice stern. I pulled out one earbud and looked up at him, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been studying, just not with Anna. I learn better on my own," I explained. Dad shook his head, clearly not convinced. "You know the rules. Your sister gets good grades, and you should be doing the same." "It's not about making things difficult," I said, feeling frustrated. "I just don't see why I have to follow Anna's way of doing everything. Can't I have my own way of studying?" He didn't respond to that, just shifted his complaint. "And those friends of yours? I saw you with them at the cafe yesterday. I don't think they're a good influence. You should be spending time with the daughters of my colleagues. They're more suitable." My temper rose. "Suitable for what? For you? Because they talk about economics and pretend to enjoy those boring university gatherings." Before he could answer, Mom appeared at the doorway, her voice sharp as she joined in. "Eliza, your father is right. Those girls are from good families. They know how to behave. They're the kind of friends you should want." I stood up, facing both of them. "What if I don't want friends who are picked for me? What if I want to choose my own friends, choose what I study, or even what I want to be?" I exclaimed. Mom's response was final. "That's enough, Eliza. You know your future is with the university. Your father has made sure of that. And after you graduate, you'll need to start thinking about settling down." The words "settling down" hung in the air like a life sentence. "You mean start thinking about being someone's wife like Anna is? Is that all you think I'm meant for?" Mom's face softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. "We want what's best for you. Following the path we've set out will give you a good life." "A good life," I repeated, the bitterness evident in my tone. "Is it a good life if it's someone else's idea of good?" No one answered. They didn't need to. We all knew there was no point in arguing. They had their plans, and they expected me to fall in line, just like Anna. Anna and I were like 2 sides of the same coin, always together but never on the same page. At university, where Dad taught, the differences between us grew even more obvious. She was into business management, the golden child, always nodding along in lectures, asking smart questions that made professors appreciate her. Meanwhile, I was stuck in the same program, but it felt like wearing a shoe on the wrong foot. Awkward, uncomfortable, and just plain wrong. One afternoon, as I trudged through a mountain of textbooks in the library, Anna breezed in, her notes organized, her smile ready. "Hey Liz, are you coming to the study group tonight? Professor Hall mentioned he's dropping by. Could be good for us to show face," she said, her tone light but insistent. I glanced up, feeling the weight of her expectations. "No, I don't think so. Those things aren't really my scene, you know," I replied. She frowned, placing her books down with a thud that matched her disapproval. "It's not about it being your scene, Liz. It's about making the right impressions. You need to start taking this seriously. We're graduating soon." I shrugged, turning back to my notes. "I am taking it seriously, just not in a way that makes me miserable. Why bother pretending? Because, Liz, sometimes you have to play the game to get ahead. You think I like all of this?" She gestured around at her perfectly tabbed textbooks and color-coded notes. "It's not about liking it, it's about doing what's necessary." I shook my head, pushing back my chair with a scrape. "Well, maybe I'm tired of doing what's necessary according to everyone else. Did you ever think of that?" Her voice softened, but her eyes were steel. "Liz, I'm just trying to look out for you. It's not going to be around to sort things out forever. What are you going to do if you keep alienating everyone? Maybe I'll figure it out on my own. Maybe I don't need to follow Dad's roadmap or yours." I shot back, feeling a surge of defiance. Anna sighed, her frustration clear. "You're so stubborn. Just try it, okay? For me, if not for yourself. Show up tonight. Talk to Professor Hall. It won't kill you," Anna urged. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just my annoyingly perfect sister, but someone who actually cared in her own way. "Fine, I'll think about it," I conceded, not ready to promise more. Thank you, she said, her smile returning. It's not that bad, you know. You might even like it if you gave it a chance. Doped it, I muttered, but I knew I'd lost this round. For Anna, I'd show up, sit through another boring discussion, and nod at the right times. It was just a few hours, I told myself. How bad could it be? As it turned out, not as bad as I thought. Professor Hall was surprisingly interesting when he wasn't lecturing from a podium. I even asked a question which earned a shocked but pleased look from Anna. Later, as we walked back to our dorm, Anna nudged me. See? Not so terrible, right? That fragile piece didn't last long, however. In our last year, Anna introduced us to her fiancé, a lawyer 10 years her senior, already well established and exactly what our parents dreamed of. Mom and Dad were over the moon, praising Anna for making such a smart match, and immediately turned their expectant eyes on me. Now, Eliza, it's your turn to find someone suitable, Dad said one evening over dinner, his tone implying that my time was running out. Mom nodded enthusiastically, already planning out my life as if it were another one of her well-organized home projects. Think about your future, dear. Someone who can provide for you, who has a good standing. I remember staring at my plate, feeling the walls close in. Anna's wedding was meticulously planned down to the last detail by Mom, from the bridesmaids' dresses to the floral arrangements, showcasing her perfect vision of family prestige. After the wedding, Mom often visited Anna, doling out advice and ensuring her life played out just as she had orchestrated. Witnessing this, I knew one thing for certain. I didn't want my life tailored by someone else's hands. One day, I was walking down the street, lost in thoughts of how to escape the life my parents envisioned for me when I heard the deep rumble of a motorcycle approaching. Curiosity pulled me toward the sound. That's when I saw him, Jake, with his leather jacket and carefree smile, pulling up beside me. You look like you need a ride, he called over the roar of the engine, a playful twinkle in his eyes. I hesitated, glancing back towards the path home and at his outstretched hand. What did I have to lose? Sure, why not? I replied, my voice a mix of nerves and excitement. Climbing onto the back of his bike, I felt a rush of adrenaline as we sped away. The wind whipped through my hair, and for the first time in a long time, I laughed genuinely. Jake shouted something about showing me his world, and I held on tighter, not wanting this moment to end. We stopped at a diner frequented by bikers over burgers, workers, and fries. Jake told me about his life as a welder, his passion for bikes, and his love for the open road. It was so different from anything I was used to, raw and real, I remarked, my voice barely above the clatter of plates and chatter around us. Don't you get scared living like this? Scared? No, it's thrilling. You never know what's around the corner. Isn't that better than having everything planned out for you? Jake replied, his eyes lighting up with each word. Over the next few weeks, we met secretly. Each ride on Jake's motorcycle pulled me further from the life I was supposed to live and closer to the life I wanted. The speed, the adventure, it wasn't just about the thrill. It was about feeling alive, feeling free. One evening, as we watched the sunset from a secluded overlook, Jake turned to me. Eliza, I don't just ride to escape. I ride to feel alive, to make every moment count. With you, every moment feels like it's worth something. I leaned into him, my heart beating fast. I've never felt like this before. You make me feel free, Jake, I confessed. He smiled, pulling me closer. Then let's not go back to just existing. Let's live. 6 months with Jake felt like a lifetime of moments I'd always dreamed of. The day he proposed under the stars with a gentle rumble of his bike in the background, my heart screamed a yes before my mouth could form the word. It was perfect, except for one looming hurdle. My parents. I wrestled with the fear of introducing Jake to them. He was everything they disapproved of, his rough edges, his wild spirit, his simple yet content life as a welder. But love bolstered my courage, and I decided it was time they knew. The day I brought Jake home, he was clad in his usual attire, a leather vest, black t-shirt, ripped jeans, and a bandana. I loved it about him. He was unapologetically himself. As we stepped inside, I could already feel the weight of my parents' judgment. Mom's face went pale at the sight of Jake, her eyes widening in shock. What in the world, Eliza? She gasped, her voice barely a whisper. Dad's reaction was harsher, his words sharp as knives. Who is this, and why is he dressed like a thug in our house? I took a deep breath, steadying my nerves. Mom, Dad, this is Jake. He's the man I love. We're getting married. Their silence was deafening. Then Dad turned to Jake, his tone laced with disdain. Married? What do you do for a living, young man? What are your qualifications? Jake, bless him, didn't waver. I'm a welder. I took some specialized courses after high school. I work hard and I make an honest living. The look on my parents' faces was a mix of horror and disbelief. Mom looked like she might faint. A welder, Eliza. You can't be serious, as voice rose, anger flaring. You expect us to give our blessing to this? To throw away your future for a welder? I felt my resolve harden. Yes, because he makes me happy. Isn't that what should matter? But the life you'll lead, Mom started, her voice tremulous. Will be the life I choose. I shot back, my own voice gaining strength. Dad shook his head, his decision clear. We cannot and will not support this. If you choose him, don't expect to be a part of this family. The finality in his tone broke my heart, but not my decision. Jake squeezed my hand, giving me the strength to face them. Then I choose Jake. I choose us. I choose my happiness. Mom's eyes filled with tears, and Dad's jaw clenched tight. If you walk out with him, don't bother coming back, Dad said, his voice cold. Walking away from my parents' house with Jake, my heart was a mess of emotions, pain, relief, excitement, and fear all mixed into one. The night air felt different, like each breath I took was a step further into a new life. We rode in silence for a while, the only sound the steady roar of the motorcycle beneath us. When we finally stopped at a small diner on the outskirts of town, Jake turned to me, his face serious. You sure about this, Eliza? I mean, really sure? There's no going back after tonight, he said, his eyes searching mine for any hint of doubt. I nodded, squeezing his hand tightly. I've never been more sure of anything. Being with you, this feels right. It feels like what I'm supposed to do. He smiled, that reckless, charming smile that had won me over the first day we met. All right then, let's do it. Let's start our life together. Inside the diner, we found a quiet booth in the corner. The waitress brought over 2 coffees without asking, and we sat there, planning our next steps. So what's first? I asked, stirring cream into my coffee, watching it swirl and blend. We'll need to find a place to stay, at least for a while. Then maybe look for jobs. I have some buddies who can help us get started, Jake replied, his tone practical but optimistic. It's going to be tough, isn't it? I said, more a statement than a question. The reality of what we were doing was beginning to sink in. Jake reached across the table, his hand covering mine. It might be, but we'll handle it together. Tough is nothing new for either of us, right? I couldn't help but laugh. A short, sharp burst of genuine amusement. Right, together. We spent hours in that diner, talking and planning. Every so often, Jake would throw out an idea that sounded so wild, so free, that it made my heart jump. And maybe one day, we'll save enough to take that road trip across the country. Just you, me, and the open road. I like that, I said, allowing myself to dream bigger than I had ever dared. Riding back into the city, we began our search. The next weeks were a blur of activity. We found a small apartment on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Jake found work at a local garage, and I picked up shifts at a nearby diner. Life was hard, but it was ours. We made do with what we had, and every night when we came home to each other, it felt like we had everything. Months later, we decided it was time to make it official and got married in a small, intimate ceremony. I held on to a sliver of hope that my family would show up, that they would see how happy I was and let go of their prejudices. But the chairs reserved for them remained empty and no congratulatory messages came. Despite the sting of their absence, the day was perfect because it was ours. Over time, I grew incredibly close to Jake's mom. She welcomed me with open arms, calling me her daughter, filling in the gaps left by my own family. Her warmth and acceptance healed some of the wounds left by my parents' rejection. Things were finally looking up for Jake and me. After he completed additional diving training and became a certified underwater welder, his income shot up to $150,000 a year. That change made a world of difference. We managed to buy a townhouse in a nice area, the kind of place I'd always dreamed about but never thought I'd actually live in. I started working as a dispatcher in Jake's company. It wasn't just a job. It felt like I was part of something important, supporting the man I loved and building our future together. On weekends, we escaped the city on his bike, roaring through winding roads and taking in breathtaking views of nature. Those moments with the wind in my hair and his warmth against my back were pure bliss. Living nearby, my mother-in-law became a frequent visitor. One such afternoon, while Jake was tinkering in the garage and I was fixing us some coffee, she arrived looking a bit troubled. "There's been some ugly news," she said as she settled down at the kitchen table. "Something about a professor at the university involved in a harassment scandal." My heart skipped a beat. "Oh, did they say who it was?" I tried to keep my voice steady, dreading the answer. She shook her head. "No, they didn't mention a name on the radio. But you know how these things go. It's probably all over the TV by now." Nodding, I flicked on the television, tuning into the news. Sure enough, there was a report on the scandal, and as I had feared, my father's face appeared on the screen. The anchor detailed accusations against him, and I felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over me. Turning off the TV, I sat down heavily, trying to process the news. Jake came in, wiping his hands on a rag, and saw my face. "What's wrong, babe?" he asked, his brow furrowed in concern. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "It's my dad.
He's been accused of harassing a student." Jake's expression hardened for a moment before he came over and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Eliza. That's tough news. How do you want to handle this?" I shook my head, not really sure of anything at the moment. "I don't know. I mean, what can I even do? It's not like we're close anymore." He squeezed my hand, understanding. "Whatever you need, I'm here for you. We don't have to figure it all out right now." I decided to wait and see how things unfolded before making any moves. Whatever decision I made, I knew I'd have Jake by my side, and that was the reassurance I needed to face whatever came next. Life had been peaceful until that unexpected afternoon at work when a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. I hadn't seen my parents in a long while, and the sight of them stirred up a mix of emotions I thought I had put to rest. Both of them looked dramatically changed. The scandal had taken its toll. Mom had lost a lot of weight and looked years older, while Dad appeared broken, a shadow of the stern man he once was. My mother spotted me and rushed over, arms open as if nothing had happened, as if years of distance and disapproval could be bridged in an instant. But I couldn't embrace her, not now. Instead, I stepped back and took Jake's hand, looking for strength in his presence. "Eliza, it was so hard to find you," Mom said, her voice cracking with emotion. Dad, ever the gruff one, cut to the chase, his voice harsh and bitter. "I was accused unfairly, you know. I went to your sister's husband for help, but that bloodsucker wanted a fortune. Your sister sided with him, and now they've kicked us out. We need your help." I stared at them, disbelief and anger swirling inside me. "Help? After all these years, you show up and demand help. We have nowhere else to go." Mom's voice was desperate. "They've disowned us too. We thought maybe we could stay with you." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "Stay with me? After you disowned me, you made it clear I wasn't your daughter anymore." Dad's face turned red, his old temper flaring up. "You owe us, Eliza, after all we've done for you." "That's where you're wrong," I interrupted, feeling Jake squeeze my hand in support. "I don't owe you anything. You threw me out because I chose my happiness over your demands, and now you want what? To just move in and pretend like we're a family." The situation was spiraling, and I could see people watching, a crowd beginning to form. Mom started to cry, her sobs loud and attracting even more attention. "You're being ungrateful after everything we've done for you," she accused through her tears. I took a deep breath, my decision clear. "No, Mom, I'm not ungrateful. I'm free and happy. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." As we walked away, I heard my dad yelling, but Jake leaned over and quietly told the security team, "Don't let them come here again." The following months flew by, filled with love and peace. We welcomed a son, a new beginning in our growing family. My parents never came back. That day in the parking lot was the last I saw of them. And while part of me grieved for what could have been, I knew I had made the right choice for me and for my family.